Was this how a man broke? Not with a gunfight, not with a storm, but with the sound of his own baby crying through the night? The winter of 1876 had turned Sage Creek, Wyoming into a white, howling desert. The wind screamed across the open plains like a ghost that never found rest, slamming against the wooden walls of Ethan Cole's ranch. Snow came down sideways, stinging and sharp, covering every fence post and wagon track, until the world looked like one endless sheet of ice. Inside the cabin, it wasn't much warmer. The fire spat and hissed, fighting to stay alive. Ethan stood over a cradle made of rough pine, his hands shaking, eyes red and hollow. His shirt stuck to his back, damp with sweat, even in the cold. He tried again to press a bottle of warmed goat's milk to his daughter's lips. "Come on, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice rough and cracking. "Please." Just a little baby Grace turned her tiny head away and wailed, the sound raw and thin, echoing off the cabin walls. Ethan's grip faltered, and the bottle rolled across the floorboards. He cursed softly and bent to pick it up, his body aching from days without real sleep. It had been a month since Lillian died. 1 month since fever stole the light from her eyes in the dead of night. Grace had been only 2 months old then. Now she was 3 and starving. Ethan had tried everything, warming the milk, mixing honey, even praying over it, but nothing worked. The baby would scream until her breath gave out, then start again. The cabin that once rang with laughter and music now held nothing but grief and the sound of hunger. He rocked her gently, whispering to calm her, but his arms were weak. His beard was thick and uneven, his face hollowed by loss. Every night bled into the next. He barely ate. He barely thought. He only kept the fire alive and tried to keep his daughter breathing. When the cries became too much, he would step outside, into the freezing air, just to scream into the wind where no one could hear him. Last week, he had ridden through every ranch and home within 10 miles. He asked every woman he could find, anyone with a baby, anyone nursing, but the answers were always the same. "No one's had a child in months." "I'm sorry, Ethan. May God help you." Even the pastor could only lower his head and say, "There's nothing I can do but pray." So Ethan went home and made a sign. In large, uneven letters he wrote, "Need help. Infant hungry. Breast milk needed." He nailed it to the front gate, the hammer slipping in his cold hands. The wind tore at the edges, but he kept pounding until it held. Then he waited. 4 days passed. No one came. The nights grew colder. Grace's cries weaker. That evening a storm rolled in, a real one, not just the drifting kind. The kind that buried cattle alive and froze rivers solid. The wind wailed like a creature from hell. The fire dimmed. Ethan sat in the rocking chair, his daughter pressed to his chest, whispering against her hair. "I used to be strong," he muttered. "Now I can't even feed my own child." Tears stung his eyes. He pressed his lips to Grace's forehead. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so damn sorry." The wind screamed through the cracks in the wall. Snow rattled against the windows. The baby wailed again, her tiny fists trembling. Ethan's heart broke a little more. Then, knock, knock. The sound was so sudden, so strange, that it sent a jolt through him. Grace paused mid-cry. Ethan froze. The knocks came again, louder this time, desperate. He stood, clutching Grace to his chest, and opened the door. The wind slammed into him like a wall of knives. Outside stood a woman, soaked, shivering, her cloak heavy with snow. Her hair was dark, plastered to her cheeks. She looked like she'd been walking for miles. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I just need a place to stay for the night." Ethan stepped aside wordlessly. She entered, dripping onto the floorboards. Grace began to cry again, sharp and piercing. The woman stopped in her tracks, her eyes locked on the baby, wide with shock. Her hand flew to her chest. 2 dark stains had already spread across her blouse. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. I had a baby. 5 months ago. A boy, she looked down, trembling. He died 2 months later. But my body. She pressed a hand to her breast. It doesn't understand he's gone. The milk, it keeps coming. Every day I throw it away, Ethan couldn't speak. The words caught in his throat. He just stared at her. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She's hungry. She whispered, "Let me help." Ethan hesitated, heart pounding. Then he nodded slowly. She set down her bag, unfastened her soaked cloak, and came forward. Her hands shook as she opened the front of her blouse. Ethan gently placed Grace in her arms. The baby rooted instinctively, searching, then latched. A small, wet sound filled the air. The sound of life. The woman gasped, tears spilling down her face as milk flowed. Her body trembled, and she cradled the baby close. "It's okay," she whispered. "Eat, little one. I've got you." Ethan watched, his chest tightening with relief so fierce it hurt. Grace nursed greedily, her cries fading, replaced by soft, steady breaths. The woman closed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan blinked, swallowing hard. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you." He stepped forward, draped a blanket around her shoulders. "What's your name?" She looked up, eyes shining in the firelight. "Clara," she said softly. "Clara Bennett." "I'm Ethan," he replied. "And this here's Grace." Clara looked down at the baby sleeping in her arms. A faint smile touched her lips. Outside, the wind still howled through Sage Creek. But inside that small cabin, warmth had found its way back in, not from the fire, but from something far deeper, something that had been missing for a long, long time. The storm passed, but Clara stayed, not by plan or promise, just because leaving didn't make sense anymore. Grace needed feeding every few hours, and Ethan never asked her to go. He didn't have to. The house, once cold and silent, now held a rhythm again. The crackle of the fire, the soft murmur of Clara's lullabies, the steady breath of a baby finally full. When dawn broke that first morning, Clara was already awake. She moved quietly around the cabin, folding small clothes Ethan had left unwashed for weeks, humming under her breath. Grace slept peacefully in her basket. Ethan stirred from the corner of the room, the chair creaking under his weight. He rubbed his eyes, half expecting it all to have been a dream. But it wasn't. She was really there. By noon, he had built another bed frame. Rough pine, nothing fancy. When Clara came in from the well with a bucket of water, she stopped. "You didn't have to," she said softly. Ethan shrugged. "Ain't much, but it's yours while you're here." She smiled faintly. "It's more than I had last night." From that day, small changes filled the cabin. The floor was swept. Beans simmered on the stove. The air smelled faintly of soap root instead of smoke. Clara cooked simple meals, washed Grace's blankets, and sang soft songs that made Ethan forget the weight in his chest, even if only for a moment. At night, when Grace nursed and drifted to sleep, Clara would sit by the fire, her hands trembling as she stitched. Sometimes she cried quietly, pretending to focus on the cloth. Ethan saw it, but said nothing. He knew grief too well to pry it open. One evening, as snow whispered against the shutters, Ethan spoke first. "She was beautiful," he said quietly. "Clara didn't look up, your wife." He nodded, Lillian. "She liked to sing when she churned butter. Drove me crazy some days. She bled too much after Grace was born." His voice broke. "We thought she'd be fine." The fire popped. Clara's fingers stilled. "My son's name was Thomas. She said he got sick. Fever. I still dream about him. Not the day he died. Just him smiling." Grace stirred in her arms. She adjusted her gently, humming through the ache. Ethan added a log to the fire and turned away, giving her privacy as she unbuttoned her bodice to nurse the baby. Clara noticed. She looked at his broad back, the way he avoided her gaze out of respect. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't respond, but his hand froze on the fire poker. Word of Clara's presence spread through Sage Creek faster than a brush fire. A widow living under a man's roof, nursing his child. It was talk the town couldn't resist. At the general store, women lowered their voices when Clara's name came up, She just showed up, alone. One said, "And he took her in? Like that?" "She's feeding his baby," another whispered. "There's nothing decent about it." Clara heard none of it directly, but she felt it. The glances, the whispers when she walked into town for flour or cloth. The way conversation stopped mid-sentence when she passed. One afternoon, she returned to the cabin to find a folded piece of paper nailed to the gate. No signature, no kindness. Just 3 words scrawled in pencil. "Go back home." Her hands shook as she tore it down. She had no home to go to. Inside, Grace was babbling softly in her cradle, waving her little fists in the air. Ethan was mending a harness by the fire. When he saw Clara's face, pale and shaken, he stood. What happened? "Nothing," she said quickly, tucking the paper into her apron. "Just tired." He studied her for a moment, but didn't push. Instead, he set down the harness and crossed the room, brushing sawdust from his hands. "You've done more for Grace than anyone could have asked. Let the town talk." "They don't know what we've been through." Clara blinked back tears. "It's not just talk, Ethan. They'll come. They'll want me gone." He looked toward the window, where snow fell in soft sheets. "Let them come," he said, voice firm. "This is our home." "You, me, and her." Clara's lips parted. "Are," she repeated softly. Ethan nodded "are," but the whispers didn't stop. They only grew. That night, as the wind rattled the shutters, Clara sat by the hearth with Grace in her arms. The baby had fallen asleep mid-feeding, her cheek resting against Clara's breast. Clara's eyes stung. She had heard voices outside earlier, a wagon stopping, a few men talking low, a woman still nursing with no babe of her own. "Ain't natural. She's bewitched him. You'll see." The words crawled under her skin like fire. Now she couldn't sleep. She rocked Grace in her arms, whispering, "You're mine, little one. I won't let them take you." By the time the first light touched the horizon, Clara made a decision. Fear had hollowed her out. If the town came for her, if they said she wasn't fit to stay, she couldn't bear it. Not again. She dressed quietly, wrapped Grace tight in her shawl, and stepped into the storm. The snow bit her skin. Her breath came fast and shallow. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to leave before someone forced her to. The wind howled, whipping her skirt around her legs. Grace began to cry, a thin, frightened sound. Clara clutched her closer, whispering, "Hush, my darling, I've got you. I won't let them take you." But the storm didn't care for promises. By the time she reached the edge of the old hay barn, her arms ached, her legs numb. She dropped to her knees, shielding the baby against her chest. "You're mine," she whispered again and again, tears freezing on her cheeks. "You're all I have left." The baby's cries grew weaker. Clara's arms tightened around her, desperate, shaking. The world blurred white. Inside the cabin, Ethan stirred from uneasy sleep. His hand reached for the cradle. Empty. His heart lurched. He called out, "Grace!" His voice cracked. He looked around. The door was open. Snow drifted in. Panic struck like lightning. He grabbed his coat, his rifle, and ran into the storm. "Clara!" He shouted into the wind. "Grace!" No answer, only the endless scream of the blizzard. Then, faintly, movement near the barn. He ran toward it, snow slicing his face, breath burning in his lungs. When he saw her, curled in the corner, shawl wrapped around the baby, his heart nearly stopped Clara. He called, voice breaking. She looked up, wild-eyed, clutching Grace. "They'll take her," she whispered. "They'll say I don't belong." Ethan knelt beside her. "I'm not here to take her," he said softly. "I'm here to bring you both home." Tears spilled down her face. "She's not mine," she whispered, "but she feels like mine. I couldn't lose her too." Ethan wrapped his coat around them both, pulling her close. "You didn't take her," he said. "You saved her." Her body shook with sobs as he lifted her into his arms, holding both her and the baby tight. "You're not alone anymore, Clara," he whispered. Not ever again. The storm raged, but Ethan didn't stop. He carried them home through the snow, one arm cradling the woman who'd brought life back to his child, the other shielding the child who'd brought light back to his heart. And when they crossed the threshold of that little cabin once more, the world outside could rage all it wanted. Inside, love had already taken root, quiet, stubborn, unbreakable. Snow still clung to their coats when Ethan carried Clara and Grace through the cabin door. The fire was low, barely breathing, but warmth returned as he laid them near the hearth. Clara's face was pale, her lips trembling. Grace whimpered softly, then fell into a weak but peaceful sleep. Ethan wrapped them both in blankets, his hands trembling, not from cold, but from the fear that he'd been too late. He crouched beside Clara, brushing wet hair from her cheek. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You're home." Her eyes fluttered open. "Home," she echoed softly, voice breaking. He nodded. "Home." The room was silent, except for the sound of the crackling fire and the soft breaths of the baby sleeping beside them. Ethan reached to the corner where he'd been working for weeks. 3 nights of candlelight labor, shaping something smooth, something strong. He lifted it gently and brought it close to the firelight. A new cradle, made of polished pine, each edge sanded soft. Clara's eyes filled. "You built," that he nodded for her. "But I guess, maybe for both of you." Clara's gaze fell on the cradle, then to Grace, then back to him. Her hands trembled in her lap. He leaned forward, voice low, almost pleading. "You don't have to leave, Clara." She stared at him, wide-eyed. "Ethan, you don't owe me anything. I came here by accident, by storm. You don't have to." "I'm not saying I have to," he interrupted gently. "I'm saying I want to." She froze. "I'd be a fool to let you walk out of this cabin," he continued, his voice rough but steady. "Grace needs you. I need you. Stay." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm not whole, Ethan," she whispered. "I lost my baby. Some nights I still wake up thinking I hear him cry. I look at Grace and I see him, and it scares me." Ethan reached for her trembling hand. "I know that fear," he said quietly. "Every day since Lillian passed, I've lived with it. But Grace, she's alive because of you, Clara. You didn't take her from anyone. You gave her life." Clara looked toward the cradle. Grace was sleeping peacefully, her tiny hand curled into a fist near her cheek. Her breath was soft and even. Ethan's voice softened even more. "You didn't just feed her milk. You fed her hope. You fed me hope." Clara blinked through her tears. "You don't have to carry your pain alone," he said. "Not anymore." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Clara reached out and touched his face, her thumb brushing his beard. "You really want me to stay?" she whispered. Ethan nodded, his eyes glistening in the firelight. "I don't just want you to, I need you to." Her voice quivered. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," he smiled faintly. "You already are. You've done the hardest thing, loving again when you had every reason not to." Clara let out a trembling breath. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Ethan's shoulders eased as if the weight of the world had lifted. He pulled the quilt tighter around her and sat beside her on the edge of the bed. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Grace sighed, softly in her sleep. Outside, the snow slowed. The storm that had raged for days finally stilled, leaving behind a silence that wasn't empty. It was full, like the quiet after a prayer. By spring, Sage Creek thawed. The ice melted from the fences, and the fields stretched green again. The town began to whisper a new story, not of scandal, but of survival. Folks said the widower Ethan Cole and the milkwoman Clara had made a home together, that they'd turned grief into something stronger, and, for once, the gossip wasn't cruel. It was curious, maybe even hopeful. The two of them worked side by side through the planting season. Ethan mended fences while Clara kept Grace laughing in the yard, her laughter ringing brighter than the morning bells in town. She had a way of making the small cabin feel alive again. Fresh bread cooling on the table, wildflowers in a tin mug by the window, and warmth that reached every corner. One afternoon, as the sun burned gold over the prairie, Ethan walked from the barn carrying a small sapling, a white fir. Clara looked up from the porch. "What's that for?" "For us," he said simply. Together, they planted it by the fence. Grace toddled beside them, her little hands patting the dirt. "What kind of tree, Papa?" she asked. "It's a white fir." Ethan said, "Strongest tree there is. It holds green even in the snow." Clara smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Like us," she said softly. "Like us," Ethan agreed. They stood for a moment, watching the wind bend the tiny branches. Then Ethan took Clara's hand, his fingers rough but warm. "If this tree stands through the next winter," he said quietly, "then so do we." Clara's eyes shone. "That's our promise," he nodded. "That's our promise." Grace clapped her little hands. "Our tree!" Ethan laughed, lifting her into his arms. "That's right, sweetheart. Yours, your mama's, and mine." Years passed, and the prairie told new stories. Grace grew into a lively child, full of laughter and stubborn will. Clara's belly swelled again with new life, and the white fir by the fence grew taller every year, green and unyielding against every storm that dared to come. Neighbors began to visit without shame or whispers. They saw a home where sorrow had lived once, now blooming with laughter. They saw a man and woman who had found each other not through chance, but through need, and turned that need into something holy. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange over the plains, Ethan sat on the porch rail. Grace curled at his boots, humming a song Clara had taught her. Clara stood by the doorway, one hand on her belly, smiling at the sight of her family. Ethan looked up and reached out his hand. She took it. Their fingers laced like roots of the same tree. He smiled. "Did you know?" he said to Grace, "when you were little, you wouldn't drink from anything but your mama's milk." Grace giggled. "Mama milk's the best kind." Clara laughed softly and kissed her daughter's forehead. "It surely is." The stars appeared one by one, the prairie quiet under their glow. The fir tree swayed gently in the wind, and inside the cabin, above the hearth, 3 names were carved into the beam. Ethan Cole, Clara Bennett, Grace Cole, not born of blood, but chosen. Every single day, chosen, not by need, but by love. And as the western sky turned gold for the last time that evening, their story ended not with goodbye, but with a promise that love, like the fir tree they planted, would stand tall through every storm. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and like this video for more Wild West love tales of loss, redemption, and second chances. Because out here, where the wind never rests, every love story becomes a legend.